Sydney returns to her apartment building late at night. The elevator doors open. Inside stands a man facing the corner, completely motionless. Something immediately feels wrong. Sydney does not get inside the elevator. A few moments later, the elevator returns. This time, it's empty. Sydney nervously steps back inside. The doors slowly close. Then, in the reflective elevator doors, she sees the man standing directly behind her. His feet aren't touching the floor. He slowly turns toward her while drifting closer. Sydney panics and starts pressing every button she can. Finally, the elevator doors open and Sydney runs out in terror. This is the Eye. Sydney has been blind since childhood. As she walks through the city, we quickly see just how powerful her other senses have become. While crossing a busy street, Sydney suddenly hears a skateboard approaching. A young boy rides directly toward a crossing without noticing a stop sign. At the same moment, a bus speeds toward the intersection. Just before the boy gets hit, Sydney rushes forward and pulls him away from the bus. This opening scene immediately shows us that even though Sydney is blind, she understands the world around her better than most people. Sydney undergoes a corneal transplant surgery. The operation is successful. Her eyes are still covered with bandages. She can hear doctors speaking far away. She can hear another patient breathing through a ventilator in the next bed. As Sydney lies there recovering, a little girl suddenly enters her room. Her name is Alicia. The girl casually explains that she has a tumor in her head. Even though she's young, Alicia seems calm about it. Then, before leaving, she tells Sydney that once the bandages come off, maybe she can finally take a look at her. Soon after, the doctors remove Sydney's bandages. For the first time in years, light enters her eyes. At first, she can only see blurry shapes. But even blurry vision feels magical to her. The doctor slowly moves his hand in front of Sydney's eyes, checking her reaction. Sydney manages to follow the movement slightly. Even though everything still looks blurry, the surgery is clearly working. He explains that her vision will take time to fully adjust since she has been blind for so many years. For the first time in her life, she can finally see light, shapes, and movement. Even if the images are unclear, she is overwhelmed with happiness. While resting in the hospital, Alicia comes back to visit her. The little girl asks if Sydney can finally see her. Sydney smiles and says yes, a little. That night, Sydney lies awake in the hospital room. The room is dark and quiet. All she can hear is the breathing of the old woman in the next bed. A strange figure is now standing beside the old woman's bed. The woman slowly reaches out and takes the figure's hand. Then the figure begins leading her away. Sydney follows them into the hallway. Then she hears a strange, eerie voice echoing through the corridor.
Freezing.
Suddenly, the figure appears directly in front of her. I'm freezing. And instantly, the hallway becomes empty. The next morning, hospital workers are cleaning the old woman's bed. Sydney asks where she went. The nurse calmly tells her that the woman died during the night. Sydney asks the doctor about the donor who gave her the eyes. But the doctor refuses to tell her much. Instead, he explains that recovery takes time and refers her to another doctor named Paul Faulkner. Paul specializes in helping blind patients adjust to vision. When Sydney meets Paul, he explains that before surgery she processed the world using sound, smell, and touch. But now her brain is being flooded with visual information too. Paul tells her she's entering a completely new level of confusion. People will now expect her to understand body language, facial expressions, road signs, things she has never experienced before. The reflection is blurry, but she becomes emotional because this is the first time she has ever seen her own face. Most people take mirrors for granted, but for Sydney, this is a moment she has waited her entire life for. Soon after, Sydney visits Alicia again. They take another photo together. Alicia smiles warmly at her. Sydney then returns home where her friends throw a party to celebrate her recovery. At first, she's excited. Her vision is becoming clearer. She can finally recognize faces. But as more people gather around her, Sydney starts becoming overwhelmed. Too many movements, too many sounds. That night, things become even stranger. Sydney hears noises coming from her oven. She slowly walks toward it. Then suddenly, when she opens the oven door, flames explode outward. It was some kind of vision. She looks around her apartment. For a few seconds, the walls appear damaged and distorted. Then everything goes back to normal. The clock beside her reads exactly 1:06 a.m. The next day, Sydney visits Paul again. Paul reassures her that the surgery itself went perfectly. He explains that before, Sydney filtered reality through her remaining senses, but now her brain is being attacked by millions of new details. He says her confusion is natural. Back at home, Sydney sits alone in the dark. She hears strange noises outside her apartment. Eventually, she walks into the hallway. There, she notices a small boy crouched down near the wall. Sydney slowly kneels beside him. The boy looks terrified. Shivering, he asks, "Have you seen my report card?" He explains that his father is going to be angry. Then suddenly, the child disappears. Later that same day, Sydney sits in a coffee shop. Across from her, a woman suddenly appears. The woman speaks angrily. Then suddenly, she vanishes. Sydney looks around in confusion, but moments later, the woman suddenly reappears and lunges toward her. Sydney falls backward in panic. People rush to help her, and while cleaning the spilled sugar on the table, the waiter briefly notices a handprint in it. That night, Sydney once again wakes up at exactly 1:06. She sees disturbing flashes of fire, a screaming woman. The walls around her room begin changing again. A noose hangs above it. Sydney carefully touches the wall. Then the clock changes to 1:07, and everything instantly returns to normal. The next morning, she tells Paul everything. She insists these aren't hallucinations. She knows the difference between imagination and reality. Soon after, Sydney buys a television and tries distracting herself at home. But while watching TV, she suddenly notices smoke entering beneath her apartment door. She walks toward the peephole. In the hallway stands a horrifying figure, motionless. Then suddenly it lunges toward her. Sydney backs away, coughing as smoke fills the room. The apartment around her changes completely. Everything is on fire. People are screaming. Another person grabs Sydney's arm. She sees flashes of a child, a woman. Then suddenly she wakes up in her apartment. A bruise shaped like a handprint remains on her arm. Eventually, Sydney becomes too afraid to stay alone. As Sydney walks through the city, a woman suddenly walks directly through her body. Both of them react in shock. Then Sydney hears people screaming nearby. A car accident has happened. Sydney approaches carefully. A blonde woman lies dead on the ground. Standing behind the body is the woman's spirit. Nearby, the same dark figure waits to guide her away. Now, Sydney finally understands the truth. Terrified, Sydney enters a restaurant and calls Paul. She begs him to come help her. While waiting, strange things begin happening around her. A glass suddenly cracks. Then a menu bursts into flames. Suddenly, the entire restaurant catches fire. The restaurant is suddenly empty and destroyed, burned long ago. When Paul arrives, Sydney breaks down emotionally. She blames the transplanted eyes. She believes the donor somehow passed these visions into her. Later, Sydney returns to her apartment building. She enters the elevator. Inside stands a man facing away from her, completely motionless. Sydney immediately senses something wrong. She steps back out. The elevator doors close. Moments later, the elevator returns empty. Trying to convince herself she imagined it, Sydney steps inside. Then, in the reflective elevator doors, she sees the man standing behind her, but his feet aren't touching the floor. He slowly turns toward her. Sydney frantically presses buttons. The figure drifts closer and closer. Finally, the elevator doors open and she runs out. On her floor, the little boy appears again. He asks the same question. "Have you seen my report card?" Sydney rushes past him. Then she looks back. The boy is now sitting on the window ledge. He slowly falls backward out of the window and runs toward the edge, but nobody is below. Then the boy appears behind her once again. By now, Sydney completely breaks down. She rushes into her apartment and smashes all the lights. She wants darkness again. Darkness felt safer. Paul eventually visits her. Sydney has covered her eyes with cloth and blacked out the apartment. For the first time, Paul finally sees how terrified she truly is. After cutting herself on broken glass, Sydney is taken back to the hospital. The doctors decide to keep her overnight. While resting, Alicia visits her again. Alicia calmly says that her tumor is gone. Then she says she has to leave now. Sydney follows Alicia into the hallway. The dark figure stands waiting nearby. Sydney realizes what's happening. She begs Alicia not to go with him. But moments later, they disappear. The next morning, Paul and Sydney's sister arrive. They bring Alicia's drawings and photographs. Sydney points at a woman in the picture and asks who she is. Paul and Helen look shocked, because the woman Sydney is pointing at is actually Sydney herself. Sydney walks to a mirror, but instead of her own reflection, she sees another woman staring back. Anna, the donor. Sydney begins researching something called cellular memory. The theory suggests that transplanted organs may carry emotional memories from the donor. Sydney becomes convinced that Anna's memories are trapped inside her eyes. She asks Paul to help her find the donor. Eventually, Paul agrees. Later, while standing in the bathroom after a shower, Sydney sees Anna's reflection in the mirror again. This time, Anna forces Sydney to witness terrifying visions. Fire, burning children, the time 1:06. Sydney finally realizes these visions are connected to Anna's death. Determined to learn the truth, Sydney asks Paul for the donor's information. Paul eventually brings her the name, Anna Martinez. Paul decides to travel with Sydney to investigate. As they drive closer to Anna's hometown, Sydney's visions become stronger. The area feels haunted. Flowers hang on fences as memorials to the dead. Children stare silently. At one point, Sydney and Paul speak to a burn victim. The child explains there was once a terrible fire. The exits were locked. Many people died. The child also mentions a witch living in Abasolo. Eventually, they reach Anna's house. The word bruja is spray-painted outside, meaning witch. Inside, they meet Mrs. Martinez. The moment she sees Sydney's eyes, she immediately recognizes them. Mrs. Martinez explains that Anna could see death. Ever since childhood, Anna experienced terrifying visions of the spirit world. Sometimes she would cry outside someone's house shortly before a death occurred there. People in town became terrified of her. Then Mrs. Martinez reveals the truth about the factory fire. Anna warned everyone the disaster was going to happen, but nobody believed her. When the fire killed many workers, the town blamed Anna instead. They called her cursed, a witch. As Mrs. Martinez speaks, Sydney notices the dark figure standing behind her. She suddenly collapses, screaming for someone to save her. Paul takes Mrs. Martinez to the hospital, leaving Sydney alone inside Anna's house. Then the visions begin again. She sees Anna searching desperately for her mother. The entire factory erupts into flames. Anna tries reaching her mother, but she can't save her. Then the townspeople attack Anna. They drag her through the streets while screaming, "Witch!" When they finally stop, Sydney hears noises downstairs. She walks carefully into the basement. The same chair from her visions sits there. A noose hangs from the ceiling. Anna appears, and Sydney watches the moment Anna hangs herself. Sydney rushes forward and frees her. Holding Anna in her arms, Sydney tells her the tragedy was never her fault. For the first time, Anna seems peaceful. Meanwhile, Paul arrives and sees Sydney speaking to empty air. Soon after, Sydney and Paul leave town. But traffic suddenly stops on the highway. A high-speed chase is happening ahead. Then Sydney notices something horrifying. The little boy from her visions is alive inside a caravan nearby. Suddenly, multiple shadow figures begin appearing all around the traffic. Sydney realizes something terrible is about to happen. She gets out of the car and enters a crowded bus. Then she notices a truck behind them. The number written on it is 106. It's a gas truck. Suddenly, everything makes sense. Anna wasn't showing Sydney the past. She was warning her about the future. Sydney begins evacuating people from the bus. People panic as Sydney screams for them to move. Then, the police chase crashes directly into the gas truck. A massive explosion erupts. Fire consumes the highway. Sydney and Paul manage to save the little boy from the caravan, but during the explosion, shattered glass flies through the air. Sydney is struck directly in the eyes. Sydney returns to darkness. The movie ends with Sydney blind once again. Thanks for watching.